Welcome to the Women in Leadership Series. Again, my name is Julianne Sinak, and I oversee our leadership institutes here at UT Health, including this program. And just on behalf of our university leadership, I want to welcome you all here. We are thrilled to be back in this new year and thrilled to have our guest speaker today. Just as our tradition to take a moment to get to know one another. It's so cold, but we're going to warm each other up in our hearts. And so our tradition here is to just take a moment and introduce yourself to the person to your left and right and around you. So just take a few moments to do that now, and welcome. Feel warmer already. How many of you, this is your first time ever attending one of our Women in Leadership? Wonderful. Wow. Well, welcome. We're so glad that you are here. Just again, on behalf of the leadership, we're grateful to see all of you, and let's go ahead and get started. It's really my honor to introduce our guest speaker today. She is an amazing woman and a very wise soul, as I described her just recently. But April Powers is the managing director of First Impression RX, a full-service consulting firm that helps companies to manage differences through training and diversity and inclusion strategy. She's a highly rated trainer for Fortune 50 government and nonprofit companies. Her client work encompasses a wide range of topics, including diversity and emotional intelligence, some of which we'll hear from her about today. But after graduating from University of California at Berkeley, April began her recruiting career with Ryan Miller and Associates, and also launched Manifest Search, and then became a manager of diversity and recruiting for Nestle USA, as well as an inclusion trainer and consultant at Amgen. She's lived in the United States and South America and Europe. She's bilingual and thus brings a global perspective with a local understanding to her clients' goals in the inclusion space. We are really honored to have her here with us at UT Health. So will you please join me in giving April Powers a warm welcome. April.
Thank you, Dr. Sinak, and thank you all for having me. I love coming to Texas. Usually you give me a warmer welcome, but the ice disappeared. I brought some California sunshine with me, so I appreciate you for taking the time today and to talk about a really important topic. I do a lot of training around working with people with differences and how do we connect with people and how do you inspire people and motivate people. And a lot of things have tugged at my heartstrings, emotional intelligence being one of them, cultural competence being another. But I think if you're in this room today or if you are on the live stream, this is really foundational work. Empathy is next level training. And we'll talk about where you can get more information here. But I really think if you're trying to get along with people, which we all hopefully are, empathy is the foundation for that. So today, just so you know where we're going with this, we are going to talk about empathy, defining it. I'm usually a walker talker, but for the purposes of the webcast and everyone, I'm going to be staying right here. So excuse me as I'm trying to bolt from side to side. Empathize with my condition, if you can. We're going to talk about how empathy impacts the workplace and your personal lives, and we're also going to learn how you can turn it on. So a lot of people think, oh, my personality, it's fixed. And those of you who are in the healthcare field, I'm sure you know about neuroplasticity. So the wonderful thing is a lot of what I teach, a lot of what the work that I do is around things that you can actually change because our brains are so amazing. We know that there is a difference actually between sympathy, compassion, and empathy. And we're going to get into that today. But some of the things that you called out were actually more aligned maybe with sympathy and compassion. And being able to turn on the empathy in all of us is something that we can do with practice, believe it or not. And the elephant in the room, this is a women's symposium, right? We have some gentlemen in the room, and I know the question in the room is, well, are women more empathic? Do we have better capacity for empathy? And what do you think? I didn't hear any deep voices in that response. So I'm going to now ask the gentleman, do you think women have a better capacity for empathy than men? Well, I am here to tell you, they actually did a study. I love studies. How many of you love studies? Okay, I love a good study. So they did a study, and the initial results, and I'll hand this to you if you need it.
Okay, thank
the
you.
initial results of the study were that women had a better emotional capacity based on the questions, that women were better at exhibiting empathy than the men were. But then they did something interesting in that study, and they offered to pay for results. So when we paid for an outcome and for the men to then read people's emotions a little bit better, thank you so much, read people's emotions a little bit better, the outcome changed and it was much more even. So the capacity is there. It's simply what do we choose to focus on? And so now you know. Gentlemen in the room and women for the men in your lives, yes, they are capable of more empathy than we think that they are. When there is motivation present, regardless of the motivation. So we can't read everyone's minds. We don't always know what's motivating them. But money tends to be a pretty good motivator for most people. I'm going to give you an example, for a lot of people rather. I'm going to give you an example of a story. How many of you have read How to Win Friends and Influence People? Okay, so you may know this story. Just to get you in the shoes, as somebody said, of empathy. There was a gentleman who was on a train, subway train, with two very rambunctious boys. And the boys were screaming, they were running through the car, they were bumping into people, smashing into them, not listening, when people said, ouch, that hurt, they were just making a ton of noise. And people just, were watching this man head down, not paying attention to his kids, just letting them run amok. And finally, someone got on the train and said to him, he knew him, and he said, "Hey, Bob, you're about to miss your stop. It's time to get off." And he lifted his head up and said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I just left the hospital. My wife just died unexpectedly, and I'm totally out of it, not paying attention." So for those of you who were in the train with the passengers, with these kids running around and screaming and bumping in, were you just like, I hate when that happens. Parents just do not nobody parents anymore. And then what happened to your heart when you heard what happened? What happened to your thoughts about those kids or maybe about that dad? So that was experiencing empathy inside your body. Right? It's having that experience of being really able to go into someone's shoes, sit there with it, and feel what they're feeling and understand what they're feeling. And it's hard to do. When you're in an argument with someone, it's hard to get in their shoes for a minute. And we're going to talk about pacing and slowing down and some of those other things. But we do know that empathy, when it's executed well, has benefits for both people in the situation. So defined empathy. I went online and Googled everything, and there are different levels of the definition. The very simple one, the ability to share the feelings of another person, or feeling like you understand another person. Very, basic, the way you would teach your child. But really, the well-rounded version, I think, of the definition is when you can experience and understand someone's condition from where they stand, from their perspective, and really stand in their shoes. It's not understanding it from where you stand. That's sometimes sympathy. That's a distancing feeling, right? So it's not about you, it's more about them. And that's really hard to do, to understand and have the full power of empathy, unless you're asking some really good questions. Because how can you possibly understand where someone's coming from or to be in their shoes unless you've actually been in their shoes? And that's what makes empathy one of those harder things to grasp and to master. It's a constant effort on your part, but it's so powerful because it actually, like as I had mentioned earlier, it benefits both people. You can't begin to understand it unless you actually look at some of the studies that they've done. And we know that on the empathy continuum, there are a few different stages to work on. You can be aware. There's cognitive empathy, where you may not have been able to understand where that gentleman was coming from, but you can, say, okay, if my wife had died in that moment or my husband had died and I had my kids with me, I get that, right? You can intellectualize it. I get it. But how many of you felt it inside, right? So how many of you maybe intellectualize it like I don't know what that's like, but I get it. It's okay, yeah. And how many of you went to I felt that? And it's interesting. Did any of you do both? Where it kind of crossed over? Yeah. So that's the ability to intellectualize it is you slowing down the process, which is a really important part of processing empathy. It's really important to do so that you don't just react and respond. It's self-management, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Because empathy is really getting connected within someone. Sympathy is standing off a little bit and saying, I get it. I too have had that problem. And pity is the most distancing of all. Pity is when you kind of are standing over someone going, poor you, poor baby. And it's a little condescending. So how many of you have heard of Brene Brown? Love her work. Her studies on empathy and shame are fabulous, and someone decided to put a cartoon to her voice.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So how many of you have had at least response? That's where I lived. I'm an optimist. I'm a hopeful optimist. That's how I've lived my life. And this was eye-opening for me, that there's actually love languages for empathy. Have any of you read the book Love Languages? There's 7 love languages. Okay. So the fact that there are different ways that people need to be heard and seen in order for them to feel like you're empathizing with them. And the one thing that people don't feel heard, seen, or that you're empathizing with them is, well, at least, and if you're guilty of it, right? At least you can have kids. At least, I'm sure, Houston has had some huge catastrophes. Well, at least you have family that you can live with. At least insurance is paying for yours. At least, how many at least have you all heard this year alone, right? Did it make you feel better that at least you have family to live with, right? And for me, there are two other ways to respond. And if you're writing these things down or taking pictures of the slides, these would be things that I would capture. And Brene started with one of them. I can't even imagine what you're going through, but I'm just really glad that you told me, and I'm glad that you shared with me, and maybe even some follow-up questions. How can I help? Is there anything I can do to make you feel better? Right? That's one of them. The other one is, you know what? I have been there. I've been in your shoes. I know my house went down too. I know exactly what you're going through. This sucks. How many of you have this sucks? That sucks. I know. It's not beautiful language. It's not, creative, but I've been there. It's terrible. And so just by a show of hands, based on these two responses, what is your empathy love language? I'm curious. Are you more, I can't even understand what you're going through. I'm just glad you told me. Really raise them high so people can see if this is you. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. What would you rather hear? What speaks to you? What makes you feel better by hearing it? Is it, I can't even understand what you're going through right now, but I'm really glad you told me. Raise your hands high if that's better. Or, totally been there, girl. I know exactly what you're going through. I'm here to help. Okay, so it's about 50-50, which is interesting. Yes?
Can I just say something in regards to that? I think, like, I'm like both, but it depends on what's going on, because if you get that, I've been there, now you're making it about you.
Right. And that is how somebody who feels, it depends, right? But somebody who feels strongly is, I don't even know what you're going through. That person who loves that love language, when they hear the other one, they feel like you're saying it's all about you. Back to you. Back to you. I'm talking, right? But just as powerful as you're having that reaction, the other person could be having the same reaction to, I can't even understand what you're talking about. But I'm glad you told me, right? They're thinking, this person can't even relate to me, right? So what you're hearing from me is not that there's a wrong way to do this. I don't want anyone to get caught up in, I'm not speaking their empathy love language, and now they feel like I'm a narcissist, right? Because at least you're trying. If we had some aliens come down and look on our planet and observe all of us from afar, they would see people in love with their cell phones. They would think our cell phones and our electronics were our mates. At this moment, I'm talking to all of you, but I have an electronic in my hand, and I'm actually closer to 3 other electronic devices, right? If we went into people's bedrooms at night, would they be talking to each other? Or would they be watching individual movies on their individual headsets with their individual devices? Maybe even in different rooms. So we have lost, in the last 40 years alone, we've lost 40% of our empathy. 40%. Part of that is due to devices, but you're also seeing the impact trickle down into kids in schools and bullying, and what we're seeing, the silos that we're seeing with political affiliations, and how many of you have unfriended someone on Facebook this year or last year? How many of you? Okay, a lot of people in the room. How many of you have been unfriended because of your political statements? Or it's okay. So our ability to be empathic and connect with others and be with them where they are, it's getting a lot harder to do, and we're not flexing the muscle as much. So when you see these and you say to yourself, well, I don't like the way that sounds, that's okay, because it might sound delicious to someone else, right? And you can experiment with that, because you'll get a reaction, and we'll talk about emotional intelligence and making that observation in a couple of minutes. Because to empathize is to civilize. I did not coin that phrase, but I love it. Our civilization is dependent upon emotional intelligence and empathy. We have the neurons in our brains for empathy, right? And we'll talk about that. But if we had to depend on only the toughest will survive for a society that's a communal society, it wouldn't work. Our society, everything that we depend on is interdependency and empathy, which, the cornerstone of that is empathy. And empathy is the cornerstone of emotional intelligence. So how do you turn on emotional intelligence through empathy? There's a great book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. If you want to know about how you are doing from an emotional intelligence standpoint, and I don't get anything from this book, but it'll give you 1 or 2 tests where you test yourself in the beginning of the book, where you are in terms of your abilities with emotional intelligence, and then you can go back online, totally confidential, and test yourself at the end once you've done some of the exercises over 6 months. But so these slides are based from that book. Emotional intelligence starts with self-awareness. Am I taking the time to be aware of how I'm impacting others and how I'm perceived in the world? Can I manage myself? That's self-management. When you're in an argument and you want to empathize and you take a beat and you take a breath and you breathe out, and then you ask yourself, am I being my best self right now? Am I being what this person needs? It's not about, are they being what I need? Am I being what this person needs? Am I being my best self in this moment? Am I asking the right questions? Empathy is a lot about asking the right questions, right? Help me understand why you're late. What happened to make you so angry? How can I better understand where I can help you better in this situation? It's managing what comes out of your mouth, because that helps you also with social awareness, and then watching another person's reaction. Social awareness is reading the room, right? If everyone in this room were on their devices right now, or sleeping, or talking to each other, I would say, you know what? They're not engaged. Maybe I need to turn this conversation around and ask some more questions to get people engaged. But that's social awareness. It's looking outside yourself, beyond what your needs are, and figuring out what somebody else needs. And doing that is sometimes based on questions, and that ends up being relationship management. Relationship management is the hardest tenet of emotional intelligence, because you're managing all those 3 areas plus the relationships with others. But if you're going to do that, and you're going to do that well, the people who do it the best are those who are the most empathic. That we certainly know. And if we're talking about emotional intelligence and success, most of it is not based on your IQ. I know I'm not in the right room to say that, but I know you guys are all very bright people. But IQ can only get you so far. We know that the most successful people have very powerful EQ, regardless of their intelligence and their capacity to learn, which is IQ. The other thing, personality and IQ are kind of set from an earlier age, whereas emotional intelligence and empathy are part of that neuroplasticity that you can grow and develop. So if your success and your development and your growth and your connection with people are so dependent on these things, the wonderful news is you can develop it, and you can take the time, and you can learn more about others, and you can practice these things. I would say if there's anything that you do after this class is practice. Practice with the love languages. Practice with people that you don't know. Practice with some of your patients if you are dealing with people. I know when you're in a people business like this one, you can have 100 interactions in a day, which can be quite exhausting, right? But the people that you're coming into in an interaction with maybe only have 10. So it behooves you a little bit to really take the time for yourself, give yourself a beat before you're interacting with people, because it's very easy to just go into transactional mode when you're dealing with volumes and volumes of people. So that's something I just wanted to say to help us be a little bit aware of, because mostly what's going on with people are things, it's the iceberg, right? We can't see. And especially with health, right? We don't know that someone's in chronic pain, or that they're depressed, or that they lost someone, or that they're worried about someone else in their family. We can't possibly know. But what we can do is try as hard as we can to put ourselves into other people's shoes, right? And when we do that, we then have the ability to be more culturally competent as well. How many of you are working with patients or colleagues who are from different backgrounds? Right? From different countries, different languages. And the interesting thing is that, we all like to say we're so much alike and that we all think the same and we're just people underneath. And we're not. I mean, we are, but we're not, right? People come from completely different backgrounds where one thing is acceptable to say and another thing isn't. People are more private. People can be more public. Pain is managed in completely different ways in different cultures. So when I'm saying try on empathy, it doesn't mean that you can always understand and connect with everyone on every level from every country and every language in the world. That would be a lot. But if empathy is important to you, then perhaps understanding and learning more about the cultures of the people that you're working with or serving, it might be an idea to take on. If you know, how many of you have the books? There are a lot of books out there on treating patients from different cultures. Do any of you have those books available to you? I do know that there are some books out there that kind of break down different cultures and different countries and how to interact with them. But empathy in action is really about you. It's about taking the time and understanding the mirror neurons in our brains create so much capacity for empathy. I mean, we are actually hardwired for empathy. Hardwired. This isn't something, 2% of us sociopaths in the room. Anybody? Maybe, I think it's about 2%. 2% of us are probably not hardwired to be empathic. But the scary thing about sociopaths is they can learn all of the ins and outs and tricks of empathy to use it against us, right? But the fact that we're hardwired to it means that when we execute on that, we have health benefits from empathy for ourselves. We have higher self-esteem, lower depression, better immunity, and on and on and on. The things that happen in our brains when we are empathic to others, it actually benefits us, and it benefits the other person in the same way. How many of you have been in a situation where you had a really great empathic experience with someone, where you felt that they really connected with you? Did it lower your stress? Especially at work, what we know is that empathic environments, people with empathetic bosses or empathic bosses have lower stress levels at work. People who perceive that their physician is empathic have better outcomes and less depression and follow their medication and their protocols much better. And I say perceive because they did a study with doctors, and the doctors who sat with their patients for the same amount of time as the doctors who stood up were perceived to have spent more time with the patients than the ones who stood up. And the doctors who seemed more empathic, who were asking questions, who were saying, I'm really sorry to hear about this, versus rushing through the caseload, their patients, people are people. Have you ever heard patients don't want to take their medicine because they're getting back at their doctor? I don't like him. He didn't like me. I'm gonna ruin myself. I'm not gonna listen to him. Said I could take it 2 times a day. I'm gonna take it 1 time a day and see how he likes that. Create more work for him or her. And so we do this as people. They've done studies on this. So yes, you do want better outcomes for your patients. You do want people to feel that you're being empathic. But little things that you can do, we're going to talk about that, like asking questions, sitting down when you're talking to a patient, looking at them, these and with each other. These are some of the things that actually turn on those neurons in the brain. And many animals do have this, animals that are in communal societies like ours. So we have a few levels, right? We have our intimate partners. How do we connect with them when we're angry or when we're having a difficult moment? Is we do have to take that beat, take a breath, take a second to think, okay, why might they be mad at me? What must they be going through? And especially if it's an intimate partner, you probably know a lot of their background that might have led them to that place. And so, trying to understand them without judging, before you say the next thing is going to be very, very powerful in your relationship. And it's the hardest one to do, right? Because it's almost like you're on a hamster wheel with that person. It's the same argument. They say like 90% of the arguments or 75% of arguments in your intimate relationship will never get solved. Doesn't that kind of take a little bit of the pressure off? Knowing that a lot of these things can't be solved. I'm going to be honest, it doesn't for me, but no. But it's still, and you still try. But when you meet your partner with empathy, and they've also done studies on this, I'm really trying to understand you. I know we've had this argument before, but I really want to get in your shoes and really understand why this is so important to you and see if I can get on the same page with you about this. It has lowered stress and helped improve relationships. The other place when you're meeting someone is the stranger. Like, you don't know anything about them. This could be a new work colleague. It could be someone on the street. It could be the grocer. It could be anyone. Is simply, you can't go off anything, right? I would say the number one part of finding empathy besides saying, I'm really glad you told me, or, I understand where you're coming from, is asking questions. Is asking really good questions based on the situation that you're in, and focusing on the person. There's also, some of us work with people that we don't like. Some of us have family members that we don't like. And we find, yeah. You're not off the hook. Because we're still trying to execute on empathy, even with those people. Because don't you think maybe they're the ones that need it the most? Right? I mean, if there's really somebody who's a difficult person in your life, imagine the difference in their life if you're executing empathy on a regular to semi-regular basis with this person. And it's hard to do. I think for people, it's also hard to do with difference. We're seeing it in our society. We're seeing it in politics. We're seeing it with people who have different religions, lifestyles, that come from different backgrounds. And there's a wonderful study that's come to the United States, is borrowing a person library. Have you heard of that? Where you can go and talk to a person that's different from you for about 30 minutes. And you learn about the person, and you spend time with a person who's very different from you, to gain some empathy. And I encourage you, in your world, if you find yourself with on Facebook, all your friends look alike, and it's not your fault. It's typical of Facebook that your friends tend to look like you, people you hang out with tend to look like you, your friends. I encourage you to go outside your comfort zone and talk to people who are completely different from you. You have wonderful neighborhoods here that are from all different parts of the world. Go explore them. Talk to people. What do you make for... My husband, whenever he gets a different Uber driver, he's like, what do you cook for your family on Sundays? What's your favorite thing? And then the whole external shell breaks down, and we're talking food all of a sudden. Food is a great commonality. I think we all have to eat. If you don't love eating, I think you should leave the room now. But we know that connecting with people who are different also flexes your empathy muscles quite a bit, because you are really outside of your comfort zone, and you have to ask a lot of questions. And the transformative power of doing that, it changes you and it changes the other person, because you're not only meeting them, but they're meeting you. And how many of you would like that opportunity for people to think of you and your people or your experience differently? And it's really about giving the empathy, receiving the empathy, and then you co-create it together with the person. So when the magic happens when both people are empathic, really. And the ability to receive empathy is kind of hard. For how many of you is it hard for you to receive things? You're more of a giver. So when people give you empathy or perceived sympathy or perceived pity, is that hard for you to receive? Like, I don't need help? So I'm going to invite you to consider that what people are trying to give you is really empathy, and to be open to it. If it's hard for you to receive, the magic for you, for your body, for your physicality, for every part of you, is actually the ability to receive as well. Because you're probably expending your energy, and you're spending a lot of yourself on others, and you're not taking anything back in, and you're spending your whole bank account. And for those of you who are receiving a lot of empathy, you know who you are, and not giving back out, I want to invite you to try to expend some of your energy on the empathy side, because you actually, there's a benefit to you as well. And we know this through studies. They've done brain scans and fMRIs and things like that, and we know that it only improves things. So, because we have this perfectionist society, and we know that it benefits you on not only on a physiological level, but on an emotional one as well, because it lights up the same pleasure centers as drugs, sex, all the things, chocolate. It really, really, absolutely lights those things up. So the platinum rule that I like to say, does anybody remember the golden rule? Do unto others, right? So the platinum rule these days, if we're going for it, is treat others the way that they want to be treated. It's really easy for us to do the golden rule because it doesn't require a lot of introspection. I mean, it does. It's just, hey, this is how my mom taught me. I'm going to do this because this is how you must want to be treated. But we have such a multicultural society, so many people from different experiences, they may not want to be treated the way you want to be treated. And I invite you, I do a lot of generational training. For those of you who have staff who are younger than you, and you think that they want the same things that you wanted when you were younger, when you were their age, they don't. So how do you figure it out? How do you empathize with them if you've never been in their society with all the electronics and all the opportunities and all the stimulation and all the pressures and the economy as we have it? How do you empathize with that when you came up at a time where it was completely different? Ask. What would motivate you? What would stimulate you here? What are you looking for in an environment? We may be able to offer it, we may not. But thinking that somebody wants exactly what you wanted when you wanted it at the same time is sympathetic, but it's not empathetic, right? So we know there's a Harvard study, and she came up with an acronym for how to execute empathy. Eye contact is number one. Some cultures don't like a lot of eye contact. Some cultures, you look at their heart center. I'm not referring to that for right now. I'm just doing US-based culture. Eye contact is really important. It means I see you. It means I connect with you. It means I am aware and I'm acknowledging your presence. If I'm coming into the room to talk to you, and if I were doing my whole talk like this, it might be a little awkward, right? And I'm not connecting. So empathy, it starts with the eye contact, making a connection with someone. Your facial expressions, we can't really control them. That's what's really interesting. You know, if you're shocked, it's going to show on your face. If you're disgusted, it's going to show on your face. If you're annoyed. So you do have to be a little bit more aware of the judgment coming out in your face, because this is part of the emotional intelligence EQ of making sure that people know how they're being received. Your posture, like I said, for doctors who come and sit down and get connected and get closer with patients, they're perceived to be more empathic. If you're facing someone, it's perceived to be more empathic. If your body is connecting and facing, aligned with someone, you're considered to be more empathic. So your posture is really important, versus sometimes there are those postures that are like, I'm ready to fight you, and people kind of expand their bodies. And so you have to be aware when it's taking that breath, taking the time. Am I being my best self right now? Is my posture okay? And your affect is the emotion that's coming from you. Sometimes we can't always control that, particularly with people that we're close to, right? We try to control our emotions, and it doesn't always work as well as we'd like it to. Our tone of voice. We all know the tone of voice when someone's about to cry, right? Or about to yell. You kind of know. So tone is very important. How you're communicating with someone and the tone that you're taking lets them know, are you ready to empathize with them? And hearing the whole person is about making sure that, am I hearing you? Is there anything else I need to know? Is there anything else you can explain to me to help me understand why you're so upset right now? Let's talk about it. If you're too upset right now, we can talk about it later, but I really want to know how I can make you feel better. And your response to them when they tell you, the non-judgmental response to them when they tell you, is going to help that other person feel heard and empathized with, versus sympathize with or pity or something like that. If you want to know more about any of these topics, you can certainly, there are a lot of resources for you, but these are some of the ones that I like. There's some, if you tend to do podcasts or things like that, there's some great TED Talks you can listen to on the road. Looking at empathy in healthcare as well, or empathy in the workplace, you can Google some of these things. But these are some of the books, that I like, and resources that you can use. I'll go back to that slide so you can take a picture if you want to. These are some of the resources that I like. The story that I talked about on the train was Dale Carnegie. And if my favorite author is Maya Angelou. And her quote is, people will forget what you said. You'll forget what you said even. They'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And that is really what I want to leave you with today, is this is such a big, broad topic. There's so much research, there's so much great research on it, but if I leave you with 2 or 3 nuggets, it's the love language of empathy. Try to remember not to say at least. Know that it benefits you from a health and psychological wellness perspective, and it benefits your partner, your workplace, your friends, and your patients. And so we're losing it. We're losing our empathy at a rate of 40% over the last 40 years. And our society, any stable society really depends on it. So it starts with you. It starts with you and teaching your family and teaching your children and working on it with yourselves and being willing to take the time to take the breath and to be present and to ask the right questions. And I really appreciate everyone being here and taking the time. And if anyone has any questions, I am here to answer them. I'll also be at the luncheon for the remainder of our time together. Does anyone have questions? We have a mic. Yes.
Hi, April.
Hi.
I have a question. When you have, when you're exhibiting empathy and you're trying to do it appropriately, however, you do run into some people who just drain your empathy bank.
The energy vampire?
It's like, I have nothing else to give, and you just keep coming with more and more poor me stories. It's like, how do you address that? At some point, it's like, stop.
So those are called those energy vampires.
Yes.
And you can also, and you're trying to disassociate yourself with that person completely, or just stop the flow of the stories?
Stop the flow of stories. It's like, I have nothing else to say. What? What do you want me to do?
In person or on the phone?
In person.
Then you can just pick an empathy love language, and sometimes this will stop a person in the middle of the story. I can't even imagine what that's like. I am so sorry. And there are no follow-up questions after that. I can't even imagine what you're going through. I am so sorry. That sucks. And it's giving the person, you're picking a love language without expanding into yours, into your experience, and you can stop them there. And sometimes that'll stop a person there. But the key is, don't ask follow-up questions if you are feeling drained, because it shouldn't be a draining experience. That's not fair to you. And that person's probably not very empathic, and they probably don't have the emotional intelligence and social awareness to see that it's draining you. How many of you have people like that in your life? They don't have the social awareness to see that they're draining you. Yeah. So and that's okay. You can always say no to that. You owe it to yourself to protect you from that. I'm not asking anyone to have the energy and life sucked out of them. But it's good practice. That's a good person to practice on, too. Because you can say, really? And how did you feel about that? Wow. That's a person, if you ever wanted to practice at a time it didn't matter, like, it can't go wrong. They're going to answer all your questions. That would be the one. Right? Sure. Any other questions? No empathy questions. Yes.
I'm curious about where this 40% decrease figure comes from? Like, is there a specific study and how did they measure that?
Thank you for asking. The psychological journal. They have been asking questions of people to show various, and I want to say it's a psychological journal, but if you want, I will email it to Dr. Sinak and I'll get that information for you. But over time, we are asking people similar questions, and we're asking them in different regions and different countries all over the world. And the Psychological Society, they tend to ask the same questions, and there are questions that they ask aligned with empathy. And they've been doing that for at least 40 years, if not more. And so what they've looked at is for the adults in the same age range, are we more or less empathic? And what they're finding is that we're a lot less empathic. And it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, if we're talking to each other through phones and electronics, then we can't see what the emoji really means on someone's face. If someone types out to you, "I've had a really bad day." Okay. Did you get in a car accident? Did somebody die? Like, if you hear someone like, "That's such a bad day," there's a difference versus that text message. So our ability to read people, our reader is off now, because we're not even looking at someone's face, hearing their voice, or smelling their sweat from their nervousness. I mean, how many of you have been in and interviewed someone and they're just, shaking like a leaf? But they can start the first day at work fine as just perfectly. But you can empathize with them. Like, I know you're really nervous. I'd be nervous too. People don't come to work as nervous as they are in an interview, right? But you can see it. Versus if you had to interview them just over the phone. So what do you do? What do you like? Any internet daters here? You got that amazing letter? I met my husband on the internet. Internet. You get these amazing letters, and then the person that you meet on the other end is like, "Who are you? Where did you come from?" It's like he's this amazing writer, or she's this amazing writer, and then the people don't match up. So I'm saying that to say the studies are probably right. I mean, this is a dramatic change in how we interact with each other as a species over the last 40 years. So our ability, our muscles that we're not flexing are taking its toll. And we're seeing it in tweets. And we're seeing it in texts. Has anyone been broken up with via text or email? In some countries, you used to be able to get divorced via text message. So if that's not a lack of empathy. Any other questions? I saw a hand up over here somewhere. Yes, right here. Oh, we're going to wait for the microphone. And are people online able to ask questions, if they have any? No? Okay. Yes.
So kind of in relates to the age group, because we know the technology for our children today, so their emotional, takes today, they lose as much of the empathy. Have they did a study on the kids?
They are doing studies. Yes, absolutely, they are doing studies on kids. And I will tell you two things. The heads of most of the tech companies in the United States don't let their kids have technology until 14. They just posted an article, if you're curious, Bill Gates did not let his kids have cell phones until they were 14. And he's like, "I'm not worried about them learning technology. I'm learning about technology taking them over." And so there's a lot more depression in kids because we need to interact with people. That is a requirement for being a human being. You have to connect with people physically, emotionally. Think about all the chemicals that we let out on a daily basis, all the pheromones. That's part of our experience as a human being. And so if you're just wondering how many likes you're going to get, or if anybody read what you posted, or if we get testosterone hits. Boys are getting testosterone hits from playing video games. The same testosterone hits that they're supposed to be getting by building, by playing, by doing, by achieving, they're getting from playing video games. And so we're losing our boys because they're on their devices instead of being in the real world doing things. We're seeing the numbers shift, right? So yes, if you can manage your kids' electronics. There are plenty of studies out there, 30 minutes a day or whatever. It's very low compared to what they're actually getting. And they're doing studies in Canada where they're letting kids in elementary school, they bring in a baby once a month. And they bring, have any of you seen this study? So they're bringing in a baby into the classrooms once a month, and they're asking the kids to interpret the baby's cries. How does the baby feel? What is the baby doing? And they've studied these kids, and they keep following up with them, and they're doing better with empathy because there actually is a class designed for them to read someone's facial expressions and emotions. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting work around empathy because it's someone compared it to the Ice Age, like in global warming, that it's an asset and a resource that we so desperately need, and we're watching it kind of melt away. Any other questions? Are we on time? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for investing the time with me today. I know it's a big topic, but I invite you to research it and discover more and to practice it and enjoy. Thank you.